Hi, I'm Alex Smith, the guitar medic, inventor of the Axmax Tremolo, and owner of Axmax LLC. I help guitar players breathe new life into their electric guitars. You know, these days you don't have to spend a lot of money on a new instrument. You can modify your own instrument or your existing collection and tailor it to exactly what you'd like. If you're like me, you've probably tried a lot of different tremolos and vibratos throughout the history of your playing, and you've probably realized that there's some hard setups, time-consuming setups, quirks, and certain things that you have to deal with to try and get these things to stay in tune. I've had the same issues. Over time in my playing, I've tried most of the tremolos out there. I've Kahlers, Floyd Roses, Bigsby's, and all of them, they work pretty good. But you know, when I was starting to play as a younger kid and dealing with tremolos, I found it to be hard enough to play the guitar and then try and deal with the issues of using tremolos. My guitar was going out of tune. I was having a lot of problems just trying to keep the guitar consistent and trying to figure out my chords, my scales, and learn in tune so I can play with my friends. Back in the 90s, I started to think about guys like George Lynch, Eddie Van Halen, the pros that were out there that were trying to take their playing to the next level, and the guitars were literally holding them back. So, you know, Eddie Van Halen made his Frankenstrat and played with that Fender Vibrato and pushed it to its limit. George Lynch was, you know, trying different pickups and different woods and came up with his own arrangement that actually worked for him. So these guys were pushing the envelope back in the late 70s, early 80s, and in the 90s I started to think to myself, you know, if I wanted to see a guitar perform better, maybe I can make a better tremolo. And I started doing research and finally came up with the Axmax Tremolo. And it retrofits the most popular platform in history, which is basically the Floyd Rose setup. A lot of people think that you have to have a double locking tremolo to have consistency with a whammy bar, and that's really not the case throughout history. You've got most of them that don't lock, or for example, like a Kahler locks on one side, still uses the ball end. Fender, you can do slight modifications and get that to be very consistent, along with the Bigsby tremolo. So try and break away from the thinking process that you have to have a double locking tremolo and cut the ball ends off, because it's just simply not the case. Today I want to discuss the pros and cons of some of the most popular bridges that have traveled the guitar world through history. I want to go through the Bigsby, the Kahler, the Fender Vibrato, and the Floyd Rose, and I want to include the D-tune on that also. So let's switch gears here and let's get into some of these vibratos and tremolos and see what they're all about. Okay, I want to introduce you now to the four most widely used and popular vibratos and tremolos that have gone through history of the guitar. We've got some that have come out in the 50s and 60s, some of these that have come out in the late 70s and got very popular during the 1980s. All these bridges are, you know, fairly reliable. You don't make it through history the way these have without being a very reliable and trustworthy and tunable bridge. We've got right here, we've got the Fender Vibrato. Guys call it a quiver stick. Comes in a lot of Stratocasters and aftermarket type guitars. We've got the Bigsby Vibrato. There's a few different models of this. You can put, these are really unique. You can put these on Les Pauls. They've got flat top models, so you can put them on Telecasters and such, and they'll actually go on semi-hollow bodies. So that's a very unique bridge. We've got the Floyd Rose double locking, and then I added the D-tune on there just to show you the potential that this bridge has. And then we've got the Kahler, which also came out in the late 70s, early 80s. And the whole post-Eddie Van Halen era of guitar players, these became the standard in the 80s and beyond. So let's go and let's start with the Bigsby, and I just kind of want to run through some of the pros with you and let you know what you can kind of expect with this bridge. kind of runs on a cam. It's a very simple design. Just spring loaded, just lays in there. You've got pins sticking out that engage the ball end of the string. They kind of wrap around here and then go underneath another roller cam and then lay over your ABR1 bridge. This basically goes around the side onto the back where your strap button is and secures there. And there you can screw it right to the body, or there are mounting hardware kits that you can buy for about 40 bucks so that you don't have to alter your Les Paul. It's a very simple design. Again, it goes on semi-hollow bodies, which is very unique. Goes on arch tops. They've got flat top models. It's a very versatile bridge. You don't have to route the guitar body at all. It's a quality product since the 1950s, and if you want to put something in your Les Paul, I would really recommend this. It's a really neat bridge. You can actually, too, just to mention, there's a nut and a spring back here, so you can actually adjust the fall away on the arm. So that's a pretty unique feature. Some of the cons with this bridge, it can be kind of challenging to string up. You kind of have to bend your ball end at a 90-degree angle and then wrap it around and then bring it over the ABR1. The first couple of times you set these up, you're going to probably have a few issues. It might get a little frustrating, but once you get a few strings on, you figure out how it goes, the next couple of times you string it up, it should be a breeze. Things to note, it does have kind of a spongy feel. Your spring tension, it's just one spring and it holds the arm up, so you don't get a lot of dive for your push. It's considered a vibrato because you can't fully dump it. You don't get a lot of action out of it. But just for wiggling notes and everything and getting kind of a surf music style vibrato out of it, it's just a perfect bridge for that. So if you can get away from the spongy feeling, you're not looking to dump fully, it's probably a good bridge for you. The one thing that kind of always irked me with this bridge is it always runs over the ABR1 bridge. Okay, so this is basically an add-on to your Les Paul. Excuse me, I got to grab some parts here. So you got your basic ABR1 bridge. You've got wound strings and then you've got unwound strings. And as this runs over and then under the roller, it still has that ABR1 that it has to go over, and that's kind of a chronic issue that some guitar players have, is that you'll hear it kink once in a while. The strings, once they stretch and slack out a little bit and come back in, you might hear a little bit of excess noise, or it might hang up and send you slightly out of tune on one or more of the strings. So be aware of that. You can't fully dump it either. It's just not, it just wasn't made to do that. But again, it's a very reliable bridge. Let me just show you the bottom of this. There's pads so that it doesn't ruin your finish if you screw it right down to the body. And again, they do make another apparatus that lies underneath and will allow you to put that on the stop bar pieces of your Les Paul so that it suspends it up and you don't even have to route, you don't have to drill into your body, and you can actually put your guitar back to stock. So Bigsby, good product. I would recommend it, especially for archtop guitars, and if you'd like to modify your Les Paul with a vibrato without having to route. Okay, so that's the Bigsby. Let's go on to the Fender Vibrato. This also came out in the 50s, was very popular on Stratocasters. It's very compact. It's got a very efficient spring system for tension. Comes out the bottom of the guitar, and you actually can adjust it out the back, so you can adjust it. You can have it float, and when I say float, you've got 6 screws here, and once they're on there, you can adjust the tension so that the back end just floats up a little bit, allowing you to pull back and push down. You can also set it up in the mode so that this becomes a fixed point of origin by hitting the guitar body, and that will be up to the user on how they want to set it up. The arm's easily removed. It just screws in and out like such. So for easy storage in a case or whatever, you don't have to keep the arm in, and it just comes right out, screws back in. So that's pretty convenient. You don't really get that on the Bigsby. Setup on this is pretty cool. It's a very versatile bridge. It's extremely simple, as you can see. There's really not a whole lot to it. Your springs go in the back and hook up to a claw in the back of the body. There's a slight bevel here for the pivot action. And then you have individual string saddles. Now, these screws here will allow you to adjust your intonation on every string separately. And you've got height adjustments here, 2 screws on each bridge piece that will allow you to tailor to the radius of your neck. Some Fender guitars have like a 9 or a 9.5 inch radius. A lot of the guitars that came out through the 80s have a 12-inch radius. You can really adjust that. It's very, very good to get precise height adjustment and to get your intonation right on. So it's a very versatile bridge. It's very small, compact. It's pretty much one of those most popular, it's probably the most copied bridge throughout history. Some of the cons with this bridge, you know, the arms are always kind of loose. You can hear a ting sometimes when you're playing. If these get loose or a little bit worn, you will sometimes hear it through the through your amp. A lot of times too, you know, this one gets to the point where it stops right there, and there's always that little bit of play. If you over throttle this around or, you know, start working those threads too much, you can actually strip it out to the point where it won't go in, it won't come out, or it just gets stuck. So please be aware of that if you decide to use this bridge on one of your projects. That's kind of an inherent. It can get it to be an issue. So be aware of that. The bridge is actually fairly thin, which doesn't really lend itself to quality tone or good sustain. You can buy bigger blocks, but that costs you a little bit more money, and it's an add-on that you need to spend money on. So be aware of that. If it's in the floating position, obviously it's up in the air and it's not actually touching the guitar body. If you have it set on the guitar body, you'll get a little bit better sustain out of it. You won't be able to pull up on it though. String up is from back to front, so you have to thread the guitar string through here, pop it through the hole, and then lay it over the bridge. That can be kind of cumbersome. You're kind of flipping the guitar back and forth to string up. Once you do a few of them, it goes pretty quick though, so be aware of that. One of the things that I noticed, and it kind of bothered me and still does, I mean, it's a great bridge, but these screw pieces that sit on these intonation saddles, and your string saddles, depending on how far down you need to set your action, these bolts kind of stick up, and they will end up ripping your hands up a little bit if you do some hard playing. Having 6 screws up front as its pivot, it's not exactly the most efficient way to do it. It is effective, and again, remember, we're talking about 1950s technology, but that's not exactly the most efficient and effective way to get the pivot. Sometimes you have tuning problems because Fenders have a plastic or bone nut on the headstock. Plus they have string trees on the headstock, and what that does is it gives the strings an opportunity to catch, kind of buckle up on components on the headstock, sending the trem out of tune. This has got no fine tuning on it, so once you go out, it's all at the headstock. You can't really adjust your tuning on the bridge at all, and I would not recommend trying to fully dump. Eddie Van Halen, you know, he took this, and Hendrix, they took this bridge to the complete realm of they just beat this thing into submission, and I think that's why the next step was to get a locking type tremolo, and they were pushing their equipment to the limit. This tremolo, or this vibrato, actually took their abuse, but kind of pushed the industry into a new direction. So Fender Quiver Stick or Vibrato, great bridge, very compact, definitely a nice piece, and it's made its history. So let's go on to the Kahler flat mount tremolo. The Kahler is a very good bridge. They have many different designs. They've got ones that are flat mount like this. They've got ones that go and hook up to the hooks on Les Pauls, however you got to route a little bit. But it has fine tune for each string. And it has many different adjustments. You know, you've got your intonation, you've got string width. You know, you can adjust the string spacing. It has brass components on it, which is great for tone. It also has height adjustment, so that you can tailor to different radiuses of the neck. It works on a cam. Okay, so it's a very efficient design. And this one actually is a hybrid. You can push that in, grab the back half of the cam, lock it out, and you can actually use it as a fixed bridge. It's very versatile. It's very adjustable. It's probably one of the most adjustable bridges on the market. And let me flip this over. It's a self-contained unit. It holds its own tension system. So basically the guitar will get routed out into this pattern. It'll go flat up, flush. Your sustain is pretty good because you are bolting the entire unit straight down with 4 bolts. So it's a very versatile, very adjustable bridge. And again, it's made its mark in history, and it's still being produced today, and it's still a very, very, very good bridge. Some of the things you can expect with a Kahler Tremolo that you know, might not be too savory is it's got kind of a spongy feel. When you push on the arm, the cam moves, and it kind of has a bouncy feel to it. It does come with a locking nut, and the locking nut on the headstock actually ends up after the plastic nut, which it is effective for locking the strings and keeping problems from the tuning machines. However, if you don't lube the nut properly, the string can hang up and send a string or two out of tune. You need to route the guitar to install this, so if you put it into a Les Paul, know that you cannot put it back to stock, and you will have the Kahler in there. Another thing, just like the Fender, it's got a threaded arm. If you cross thread, or you know, there's always a little bit of play in it. If you cross thread it or you really abuse the tremolo, you may have problems with the threads, and they could possibly strip out. You have to notice too that this tremolo has a lot of small parts. I mean, there's just 3 bolts per saddle here, the wheels, the thumb screws. So there is always a potential of losing parts or parts breaking. There is a timely setup involved in this. When you install this on a guitar body brand new, and you are just going to set it up for the first time, you have to be very patient. You have to take the steps to get everything to work perfectly. You have to set your intonation, you have to set your radius, and then you have to use these 2 screws to balance it out if you're going to use it as a tremolo. It doesn't quite fully dump, but you do get a lot of dive for your dollar out of this. Again, sustain is good and everything. There's a lot of great points to this tremolo, and it's really made its mark in history. If you want a very highly adjustable bridge that you can tailor to, you know, string spacing and everything else, this is definitely a good match for you. Being that it's self-contained with its spring system and everything, it's just a quality bridge. So that's a basic rundown of the pros and cons of the Kahler. Let's get into the Floyd Rose. Floyd Rose is kind of like Fender. It's probably one of the most copied bridges on the planet right now. It's efficient for the double locking characteristics. It has fine tuning per string. It uses the same efficient spring tension system as the Fender Vibrato. The arm action on this, even though there are threads to it to secure it in, the arm doesn't run on the threads, so there's no chance of stripping it out. You will get a little bit of play in the arm. it will accept add-ons. Okay, so like I've put the detune on here just for an add-on so that you can see that it's probably the first bridge in history that will allow an add-on to do a drop detuning. And that goes right on the fly. You just pull it back out and it'll drop that saddle down. And you can push it back in and you get back to your E note. So that's pretty cool. And they've got big blocks made out of brass and everything for better sustain and everything. So like parts are readily available. A lot of the different Floyds on the market actually have the same size saddles, same parts, so they're almost interchangeable. It has a 2-point pivot system, which is basically a slight knife edge that goes in, and that's probably the most efficient way to pivot rather than having 6 bolts holding it to the body like the Fender. So this is a very efficient bridge. This will fully dump. However, you got to realize you have to have it set up properly, and you have to have your string tension and spring tension equal. So probably one of the more efficient bridges out there. It does not have a spongy feel to it. It's very, very responsive to full dives. And again, once it's set up, you can beat this thing up and it's going to take your abuse. Some of the cons to this bridge, sometimes the knife edges get a little bit worn, and once that happens, you know, your trem's not going to come back to a 0 point and it's going to go out of tune. For setups, you always got to cut the ball end off and clamp them in. Excuse me. Time-consuming intonation process. If you're going to buy one of these and set these up, you almost have to buy the claw, which is another add-on to this, so that you can adjust the bridge pieces. If you don't spend the money to do that, every time you break this bolt loose to move that saddle to set your intonation, it's going to knock the guitar out of tune. It's going to change the balance of the whammy bar, and you're going to be constantly retuning each time that you move one of those blocks. If you break a string in the floating position, your guitar's out of tune and rendered useless. So be prepared that if you put this in a floating mode, you break a string, I would hope you'd have another guitar to back it up. The bolts on this and the blocks in here, they are just standard bolts, and they have what's called a black oxide finish. Now, black oxide is kind of like a gun finish, not really, but kind of like it, whereas it needs to stay oiled up and lubricated so that it won't corrode. So you get a couple of years worth of hand oils on this, and your parts start to corrode, lock up inside the intonation blocks. Your bolts will start to rust, and you know, you can buy other pieces to put on there that are stainless steel, but again, that's money out of your pocket just to keep the trem up and running. Again, too, you know, these blocks are just laying in there, so when you're going to string up your guitar, sometimes you can lose one of those blocks. If you're doing a setup, say, in your living room, and you drop one of those on the carpet, it's gone. If you want to do a detuna or the detuna trick, that's another bit of money spent. It adds a little bit more to this already lengthy setup. So be aware too that if you want to do the drop D trick, you can't set this up to float, and you've got a whole other setup to deal with this apparatus, which is going to lengthen your setup on each restring. We want you to notice that the body on this is very thin. It's just a stamped bent metal that's been hardened. So there's not really a whole lot lending itself to tonal quality or sustain. Again, you can buy blocks of brass and stuff like that, but again, that's more money out of your pocket to get this to perform the way you need it to. Again, knife edges can wear out. On this model, there aren't removable knife edges, so once the knife edges start to go, it renders the entire body pretty much useless. So if you're going to buy this, know that eventually over time, and it may take you 20 years to wear out the knife edges, once they wear out, you're going to have to buy a new one. There's no replacing them. There are a lot of parts, arms, stuff like that on eBay that you can buy fairly inexpensively to restore these. However, know that this black oxide finish is probably, and you've probably noticed this with your tremolo experience, that those bolts start to rust out. In the next video, I want to take these bridges and I want to get a little bit more involved with setups on them. I want to discuss how you can get these to perform to their peak using some tricks that I've learned over the years so that you can get performance out of the tremolos that are already out on the market. I also want to introduce you to the solid brass Axe Max tremolo.